Surprise! Sunset Overdrive is on the PC. It released last week and, well, it's been teased for a while, but we were excited to finally see it arrive. For this video, I kind of wanted to sit back and discuss my experiences with the PC, how it stacks up against the Xbox game, and maybe cover some of the problems I encountered along the way. And to do that, I've brought along our PC expert, Alex Battaglia.
Hey John, I'm also really surprised, and I have no idea what to think of this, so you're going to have to talk me through this all.
That's right. I'm the one that's been spending the time playing the game thus far. Alex is just here to talk with me about it as we sort of muse over some of the randomness of certain design decisions here, but also talk about the quality, because this is, at its core, a beautiful looking game. It's a beautiful playing game, and it's so nice to finally see it available on the PC.
Just to start it off, the one thing, this is the first time we saw Insomniac's engine basically running on next generation hardware, and which was kind of like the showing of things to come that we'd see down the line with Ratchet and Clank, and also with the most recent Spider-Man, which is just a gorgeous looking game. But it was kind of on hardware, you could say at the time, which at the beginning of this generation had a lot of negativity surrounding it with the Xbox One. But the game came out and it was 900p. It ran for the most part at a pretty okay 30 FPS and looked gorgeous to boot at that frame rate and resolution, right, John?
Yeah, exactly. This was it was kind of a shock when Insomniac announced they were doing an Xbox game, but it came out, and I think it's one of the most impressive games from the original Xbox One era of games, in that, they really took advantage of the hardware in a way. Sure, it's 900p, but this introduced us to what Insomniac's engine could do. Like, this shows their ability to handle a massive open world with the best motion blur in the business, and that's, which we both love. And just, it's a very fluid, fast game that can throw a lot of stuff around the screen. And you know what? It still holds up today, and I'm just a little disappointed that it never got an Xbox One X patch, but I guess they've moved on.
I'm surprised it didn't get one with this re-release, actually. I thought that would be like a drumming up to it, but I guess not.
Yeah, exactly. I was kind of expecting the same, like, hey, maybe it'll show up on Xbox One X as well, but no. So here we are, the surprise PC release. Again, teased for months. Not really teased, it sort of just showed up in some databases, and we all kind of suspected it's got to be coming at some point, right? And
Halo 3 also did too. Can't ever forget that.
Exactly. So this one appears on the Windows Store and on Steam, I believe. I'm using the Steam version here. And, like I said, I want to talk about my experience with the game and how it stacks up against Xbox, not just like how does the game stack up across a million GPUs, because I don't have a million GPUs here at my home office. Okay, so first impressions to start with. Obviously, the big jump here is going to be resolution. You're going from 900p on Xbox One to, well, in my case, 4K native on the PC, and that is an eye-opening experience.
Yeah. Do you think like the texture details themselves are greatly aided by it, or all the post-processing effects? Do they scale well with resolution?
So yeah, I think everything does scale well with resolution. In fact, it always kind of felt like it was a little bit hidden by the lower resolution. So now that you can run it at 4K or higher even, it really does bring out the textures, and they do look great. It still holds up. But there is one problem that doesn't seem to have been addressed, and that is a little disappointing, and it's distant Lods. So this game, being an open world game, but also an Insomniac game, hitting a constant 30 FPS was very important. And they did that at the expense of very noticeable LOD pop-in. You could really just see whole chunks of the environment sort of pop into view as you traverse quickly. Something they kind of fixed with Spider-Man for the most part. But they didn't fix it here. And when you bump up the resolution so high and you look out across the city, it's pretty evident when stuff kind of pops in and out of view.
So the PC version basically has the same LOD values as the Xbox One version in terms of like when things pop in?
Well, for the most part, it is basically identical, but there are instances where I did notice things popping in a little bit late on Xbox. But really, in general, they're the same.
That's obviously a bit of a disappointment, but I guess that kind of points towards the way the graphics menu and the way this port is kind of designed in the first place. It's a very raw port of the Xbox One version, as you've been telling me. There's a kind of a lack of customization that you're used to in a lot of PC games, a lack of a wide range of support for differing hardware and monitor types, and the kind of changes you can make in the menu appear to have kind of massive ramifications on the game's graphics, and not in the same way you're used to where there's an ultra and a high setting, but rather you're turning off big portions of the graphics themselves, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I guess one thing I should note is this is an Insomniac game, but based on what I'm seeing at startup, this seems to have been ported over by Blind Squirrel Games, which was responsible for the console ports of BioShock, like Infinite to the PS4 and Xbox One, and I guess the BioShock collection in general. So they seem to have taken the reins here. And I guess one of the limitations is, as a console game, maybe there's a little bit less room to play around with in terms of settings, because, you know, this is their own custom engine, very specifically designed for Xbox One. So, yeah, most of the settings in the options menu, it's just stuff like you can turn off motion blur if you want, which why would you? Because it's amazing in this game. Don't turn it off, people. If you're watching, no, I see you posting that comment. Do not post that comment. Motion blur in this game is awesome. Look at this. Okay, but you can also turn off SSAO if you want. But the weird stuff is if you turn off depth of field and especially the fog effect, this happens. As you can see, it looks really weird. Clearly, the game's visual design was, it was centered around having this sort of height fog visible at all times in the city.
It really changes the skyline a lot. Like it looks kind of old school, kind of pixel arty.
It does. It really does. I was thinking of like, hey, this is like running Doom 2, this is like running Doom 3 on a Voodoo 2 card. Maybe not that bad, but it doesn't look correct.
Everything's just gamma incorrect. Yeah, that's what it looks like. Yeah,
but at least there are some other good options. Like you can unlock the frame rate, which is key here.
Ooh, okay, so now wait a minute. Did you play the game at 120 FPS per chance?
I did, in fact, yes. I've played it at 30, 60, and 120, and all of them work as expected. So the 30 FPS mode, in my case, it does seem to deliver an evenly paced frame rate, which is very nice. But the 60 FPS mode is optimal for me in the sense that I can play at native 4K on my display, which does not support 4K 120 input. But I did try 1080p at 120 hertz with downscaling from 1440p actually. The fluidity is amazing at 120 FPS. It really does feel great. I couldn't quite lock it to 120 though. I mean, I was relatively close most of the time, especially during gameplay, but it kind of fluctuated sometimes down to the 100 FPS mark or so, and in really busy sections or cutscenes, it kind of even dips a little below that. And just to note, I'm running a reasonably high-end PC with the 7900X i9 in there, coupled with the GTX Titan XP, so it's not a 2080 Ti or anything, but it's quite fast, so it's definitely viable to play this game at a super high frame rate on a fast enough PC.
Putting up, 120 FPS really shows off a lot of the great animation detail in the game. The game has lots of funny animations in it. I know that. And also, since we've talked about it so much, the glorious nature of the motion blur in this game, it just looks astounding. And like at 120 FPS with there's just basically no gaps between any movement at that point in time. And I'm not sure what they're doing necessarily always with the motion blur in their engine, because between this game, Ratchet & Clank, and also Spider-Man, it just generally looks really natural and kind of, it's not the same Pixar quality, but it has that same shutter speed that you would find in film almost, except obviously matched to higher refresh rates like 30, 60, 120. And it just looks so good. What is your experience with it at 120 hertz?
Oh yeah, it absolutely brings it out, and I was impressed that the shutter speed settings work well at higher frame rates, because sometimes they do not, you kind of lose something, but no, this looks similarly good at any refresh rate that you choose. But even if you were playing at 30 FPS, it does help there a lot, but I guess that's one of the main advantages of this port, is being able to play at high frame rates, since it is a fairly fast-paced game, and that was always kind of one of the limitations. So when you run it at 60, it just feels phenomenal. So much more responsive to play, and you can really kind of keep up with the action well. And speaking of which, we should probably talk about controls. Gamepad support is of course in and kind of the preferred way to play, but of course there's also the mouse and keyboard support.
Do you think, I've read some people were having problems with the mouse controls online, but do you think it's like acceleration issues or something like that other people could have been happening?
Yeah, it feels like there's sort of a multitude of problems going on here. The acceleration curve is messed up for sure, but there's also an issue with the maximum speed at which you can move the mouse, leading to the sense where it's a little too sensitive at the low end, but then you can't move it quickly or whip it around like you can in most games. Almost as if there's some kind of invisible bounding box in here. It really doesn't feel great.
Okay, so in terms of other unoptimal things, does the game support 21:9? I don't.
It does not, and even the options menu says don't even bother. You're going to have black bars, and it's true. It's a 16:9 game, but you know the modding community. Hopefully they can rise up to the challenge and take care of this in the future, but I was going to say, it's their own custom engine, so there is a possibility that it could be more difficult to pull off, but I have faith in you guys.
Yeah.
You can do it.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Okay, but it's not the only limitation. So there's a couple things with this game that I think really need to be mentioned about just the general display and how it works. First of all, this is not an exclusive full-screen game from what I can tell. It seems to only run in borderless window mode or normal windowed mode, which isn't a huge problem in my case, but this definitely causes issues in some configurations.
It's going to be problematic for people with G-Sync these days and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, no. So that is a huge downer. I'm disappointed to see that. So that's not good. Along those same lines, you'll want to go into Windows properties on the EXE and make sure you disable the setting regarding DPI scaling. Yeah. Since I'm running on my 4K TV with 200% scaling so that I can actually read everything, the issue is if you start the game with scaling enabled, you're basically losing resolution. So even if I selected 2160p in the game and it was outputting at that, it seemingly only rendered at 1080p. So you basically were losing resolution, as if, I've seen this before in many other games, and it's quite annoying. But thankfully, there's a Windows option right here that you can use to disable it, and it fixes it perfectly.
Okay, but that's just on the EXE, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, good. Okay, you're not disabling the entire Windows.
No. It's just for this game, and it fixes it entirely. The other issue then centers on anti-aliasing. So you do have a bunch of resolution options, and whatever you choose seems to scale up to the output resolution. But I found that the two available anti-aliasing solutions, I guess SMAA and SMAA2X, are extremely ineffective to the point where I'm not even sure if they work. There's really not much to say about it. They don't look right. So the workaround for now, what I've been using then, is just to install Reshade for this game. Pop open your menu, and I'm using a mix of FXAA, SMAA, and sharpening at this level, and when you combine the three together, it hugely cleans up the aliasing artifacts while also sort of giving the game an extra little bit of sharpness that I think looks really nice. So this is my preferred way to play. But Alex, you were saying that there's some really good reasons to combine SMA and FXAA.
Well, the thing is, I think at lower resolutions, the effectiveness is not that great. But at higher resolutions where you're already kind of, for most people like 4K, the pixel density is so high, you're not usually seeing individual pixels. When you use SMAA, you're getting great silhouette coverage of things like that, edges of objects. But FXAA, even though people dislike it a little bit for its, I wouldn't call it blurriness, but for softness, what it actually does is affects like the max luminance of a pixel. You'll see less specular aliasing at higher resolutions, which is great. It'll give it more of a CG look, which I think is wonderful for a game like this, and generally for most modern game engines.
Yeah, that's great, and you're absolutely right. You can see the effects here, and it looks really nice this way. A lot of the footage I captured for this video was done prior to enabling Reshade those, so we're kind of seeing a mix of gameplay from both. But you kind of get the idea. It's a very helpful thing to enable. But yeah, overall, I think the other point, I guess, to discuss is performance, which on my rig is mostly pretty good, but it's not perfect. Basically, I started by playing at native 4K, targeting 60 FPS, and found that in most situations I can hold that frame rate. But I ran across small dips here and there during traversal, and especially during some of the cutscenes. I also found that reshade with those settings I mentioned before causes a very, very slight dip in performance, suggesting that I was kind of right at the cusp there when running at 4K. So most of those issues can be completely eliminated just by dropping the res a little bit to 1440p, which of course is not optimal, but again, with reshade enabled, it still looks pretty good and you get a very fluid level of performance. So I kind of went back and forth. I played a lot at 4K, I played some at 1440p. Generally okay, but I am a little disappointed in the overall performance, I'd say.
Do you think those are attributable to your, well, you do have an amazing GPU and also an amazing CPU. Would you attribute to one of the other? Because it's kind of surprising if it would be the CPU.
Well, again, as I said, if you drop it to 1440p, it cleans up most of the issues. So yeah, it pretty much seems to be a GPU issue. Either way, I'll be curious to see what other users encounter, but for my case, it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So when you look at the whole picture then, this is kind of one of those ports that it's good in the sense that your PC can power through it. If you can power through this, you have a version that is vastly superior to the original Xbox One version. But I wouldn't say it's an amazing port, because there are those issues that I've mentioned before, like the AA and the full screen modes and things like that, and the controls aren't quite perfect and the performance maybe isn't quite where you'd expect. Plus they weren't able to address issues with the Lods. So when you combine all that together, it's good but not great.
And in the end of the day, though, I think it's just wonderful to get a port at all in general for the legacy of the game. There may be a time when there's no more Xboxes out there, or backwards compatibility is not reasonable. Having this on PC is great for the history of the game.
Yeah, and it is a great game. It has some limitations. I don't love all the open world design elements, but the core of the game is so much fun to play. Grinding all over the city, taking out tons of enemies. It has this playful spirit that I really enjoy. It doesn't have the style of Jet Set Radio, but I feel like this is the punk version of Jet Set Radio in a weird way. Like it's heading in that direction, and I feel like they may have, probably were somewhat inspired by those games to a degree. And yeah, it's a lot of fun to play through, and I'm enjoying sort of revisiting it on PC since it's been ages since I've played through it on Xbox. Well, I guess it's only like 4 years, but
Is that one of the first games you covered for Xbox One, perchance?
I didn't get to cover this in its original form. Ooh. This was an article only, and I think Tom or Dave did it back in the day. So yeah, we've never really sat down and done a nice video on Sunset Overdrive, just because it released before we were really making that sort of content. Yeah. But here we are. Sunset Overdrive is awesome. I recommend picking it up for sure, especially since the normal price is like $20. So you really can't go wrong. So I think that's about it for this video then. Thanks again for joining me, Alex.
Oh, anytime, John.
And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, follow us on Twitter, ring the notification bell, and all that other good stuff. And until next time, this is John and Alex signing off.